Okay, so welcome back everyone. Certainly last but not least, one of my other favourite essays in the team in the UK here, solution architect Steve Walsh is going to talk to you about securing your application data in the cloud. So welcome to the stage, Steve Walsh. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I hope you can all hear me okay. Excellent. Right, well, thanks for that very kind introduction. So, how many of you have recently noticed the breach in Optus, the Australian telephone people? Okay, so a few of you, yeah. And also earlier in the year there was one from Opta as well. And that's kind of something that we see happening every day. And that can lead to a lot of consequences for a reputation of a company. It can be their credibility, it could be their financial loss as well, could be impacted by that. So imagine if that is your organisation and how that would make you feel about your organisation in that scenario. Well, my name's Steve Walsh. I've been in the data and security world for more years than I care to remember. And I'm going to show you the types of issues that can happen as a result of that, and how MongoDB Atlas can help you to secure data and reduce your risk. So here's my agenda. We're going to look at the complexity of cloud security, and also off the back of that, we're going to look at some of the consequences of security issues that can come from that, as well as also how then MongoDB Atlas can help you to secure your data in the public cloud. And then hopefully I'll allow a little bit of time at the end for questions, so you can ask a few questions as well if you've got any, and obviously you can always feel free to reach out to us anytime to ask questions. So to start with, security is hard in the cloud. It's complex and it's prone to errors. Now, all the cloud vendors do things brilliantly, but they all do it very differently, as we're going to see. So do any of you store data that is perhaps sensitive in any way? Data within your databases that might be sensitive? Okay, a few people, yeah. And that's something that I think we're seeing more and more happening of. And also, how many of you use multiple clouds within your organizations? Yeah, so that, again, that's something that we're seeing more and more. So multi-cloud is quite common. And the thing is that although, as I said earlier, they all do things brilliantly, they all do things a little bit differently from each other. So, for example, their security policies are often different. So security policies can be different across the different types of clouds, and it's hard to understand all of those different nuances each time you're looking at different ones. They also handle their changes tend to happen significantly over time as well, which means people are always wanting change, things to iterate and iterate and iterate. And so again, trying to keep up with all that change, some of that change could be the cloud vendors themselves, the way they do things. So it's keeping track of all that change is quite challenging. And then finally, that kind of gives you that 3 times more complexity as a result, which again is a challenge to keep on top of when you're trying to do this on a daily basis. So here's an example of how that might work. So on the left here, we've sort of got this typical concept that most of the cloud hyperscalers have. You have like, this is an AWS example, but effectively you have what's called root accounts. And very often clients will have multiple root accounts, and those are simply the users within the, in this case, AWS environment. But those can also be human as well as things like bots as well. Bots are also identities themselves. And so those users can also be bots. And they often have quite a lot of additional access as well. And then pretty much every type of application has some kind of concept. There's groups and there's roles. And roles can themselves also be part of groups. So this starts to add on additional layers. But then you get to policies, and this is where it starts to get much more complex, because this particular idea of a policy is that it's a JSON object here. And this is a very simplified one in AWS, but what it actually does is it gives people access in different ways. It could be based on time, it could be based on geography. There's lots of different layers that can go into one of those. So it can start to get more complex. And then essentially people can have multiple policies across a single set of resources. And then obviously the question you have to then answer off the back of that resource is, well, these resource objects on the right here actually what access does somebody have to those? And that's where it starts to get complex, trying to work out what those policies mean. Because most of those policies are taken in context with various other things like roles and groups and so on and so forth. So it's very difficult to start to answer that question. So if you're not doing this every day, and if you're doing it across different clouds, it can be quite difficult to keep track of all that. And I think what also often kind of exacerbates this as well is the time constraints. We're all under pressure to get things done as quickly as possible, trying to innovate and keep up with competitors, trying to do new things and make sure that at the same time we don't encumber DevOps and developers with lots of sort of extra infrastructure when they're just trying to do their job. So we want to try and make sure that access is granted where it needs to be, but it also isn't excessive. It's also hard to keep up with that constant changing environment, and effectively as well, you've got things like authentication, you've got your identity considerations, you've got your classic joiner, mover, leaver process, or I always like to think of it the other way around, leaver, mover, joiner, because leaver is a really important one to make sure that that access has been taken away. Because if it isn't, then obviously that can leave things open to people that it shouldn't do. And also when you're federating into these particular cloud environments as well, it's that kind of federation, what roles are granted to AWS, GCP or Azure as you're being federated in from your single sign-on solution. So there's a lot of things to consider there in terms of that. So here's a little example of how it could be perhaps misinterpreted. So if we look at the one on the left here, effectively that's meant to be read-only. But what's happened is that someone has accidentally added in the ability to write. So people think, oh, it's right, I can give these people a read-only role, read-only policy, but in fact, actually, that's now given them write access as well. And then the one on the right here is another, it's meant to be sort of read-only locally and internally, but actually, someone has gone and given it the ability to go worldwide. And it means that they've got public access to that. Now, in fact, one of the well-known financial breaches did in fact happen as a result of putting the wrong permissions on an Amazon S3 bucket. So that left it open to the whole world for people to pull stuff out. So these types of things are very easy to do, and this is the type of stuff that can happen. So if we look at a few statistics to back this up here. So 20% of large organizations still take months to identify a breach. And in 2021, over 11 billion records were exposed worldwide from just 7 data leaks. It's quite a shocking number of records there. And 30% of human error and config issues are still a failure to configure cloud security correctly. And so this is where, again, you see that this is a sort of fundamental foundation. You've got to get this stuff right. And these have come from very reliable sources. There's ITRC and there's also Verizon published a very, very useful report. And you'll get these references at the end in the decks, which you'll get in about a week's time. And then also, if you look at large companies like LinkedIn, say Facebook, they're in the press, people expect to read about them. But it's not only the large organizations, some of the small organizations can get impacted as well with breaches. So Cognite were quite a small organization, only about 2,000 employees, and yet they breached, and I haven't put too many zeros on that, that is correct. 5 billion records were breached. Now, what's also quite ironic is that they're a security analytics company. So it's kind of one of those things that are unfortunate, but it just goes to show it's not just the large organizations that are in the public eye, anybody can be breached. So now that I've shared with you the challenges of securing your data in the cloud, let me show you some of the potential consequences of getting it wrong. And this can lead to breaches, it can lead to loss of data, it can also lead to exposing sensitive data, and it can be things like regulatory fines and even brand damage as well. And the effects can be far-reaching into the future. So regulatory concerns cover all industries these days, from finance, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, right through to retail, utilities, oil and gas, and even automotive as well. And violation of regulations can result in hefty fines. And they can be ranging from standard spot fines through to large fines based on percentage of turnover, such as the infamous GDPR. And a multi-billion-dollar industry exists in ensuring these regulations are met, including regulatory inventories, data sensitivity monitoring, and identity governance and security. And they range from financials such as PCI DSS for credit card data. There's a new version of that, version 4, coming out which will have to be in place by March. So many financial organizations are having to adhere to that and start getting ready for that. There's also data privacy ones such as the infamous GDPR, and also healthcare such as HIPAA. And each have their own requirements, and many, such as GDPR, could actually levy huge fines, 20k euros, or in fact 4% of an organisation's worldwide turnover, whichever is the greater. And plus you've also got more and more local regulations building up, things like the FSCA, the Financial Services Conduct Authority in the UK, and they're actually on the rise. A lot of more localised regulations are coming out, which are getting more and more stringent sometimes than the main bodies. So that's something else to take into consideration. So I think Christine Lagarde of the IMF states this quite succinctly. The cost of getting this wrong can be catastrophic. Which brings us nicely onto the subsequent and ongoing cost of a breach to an organisation. So breaches can result in the loss of customers. Customers who've had their identities leaked might be less likely to stick around. And they're also likely to warn their friends and their family about, the organisation as well. In a well-known breach of a UK-based telco, they lost over 25% of the market share overnight. And 4 years later, they're still running expensive marketing campaigns to try to regain their customers. Now, post-GDPR, they'd have paid a huge fine, but as it happens, they just got in it just happened just before GDPR came into place, so it was okay. But, it just goes to show what could have happened. And in addition, many of those sort of breached organisations tend to sign customers up to credit protection agencies. And the aforementioned telco did actually do that. And of course, that's an extra further cost to that organisation. Although sadly and rather ironically, that agency themselves, the credit agency, also had a breach 6 months later. So, you really couldn't write this stuff, but these things do happen. And ultimately, the effect on stock price can be far-reaching into the future as well. And of course, it's not just customer data that can be breached. It could be the organisation's financial data, resulting in industry fines for breaching public company financial policies. It could be intellectual property. I actually did a security assessment in the fairly recent past that held sensitive formulae for a conglomerate that essentially meant that if someone, and it was wide open when I did the assessment, and I thought, well, it could have meant that their competitors could have advanced themselves years. As they said, I think, in Jurassic Park, but if actually it's that kind of thing where people can literally get hold of those formulae and beat their competitors that easily. So that's quite a scary thought. It could even be your own employees' information as well. So it could be, and it's actually happened to a well-known UK supermarket, and there was in fact a website set up for those employees, about 10,000 of them, to sue the employee. Now, as it happened, they were found not guilty, but it shows what can happen when a disgruntled employee who was disappointed over an internal disciplinary action, what can happen as a result of that by breaching that data. So, and then that, of course, leads to things like identity theft and all those types of things that can happen when that employee data has been pushed out there. So I think the single largest cost to an organisation post-breach is brand damage. And I'll say that again, brand damage. I don't know if you can remember a breach in the press or something maybe that you were using that brand and what that impact might have had on you. Sometimes when you getting that letter, it might have made you feel very differently about it. One of my colleagues got a letter from one of them saying his information had been breached, and he was very, very upset. So it's those types of things that stick in people's minds. And also the Verizon security port actually quotes that stock tended to trend downwards for over 2 years after a breach rather than recover. So again, it's something that, brand damage is very hard to walk away from. So now that I've shared with you the issue, let me kind of show you how you can address that using MongoDB Atlas to secure your data in the public cloud. So MongoDB's motto in Atlas is that we are secure by default. Minimal configuration is needed, and it's verified by numerous global and regional certifications for security assurance. But people might ask, where is my data stored? Well, you control data residency via regional selection. You have a dedicated VPC deployment within your infrastructure as well as you build each Atlas cluster within Amazon or a GCP or Azure. You might ask, who has access to my data? Well, you control that via role-based access controls. You also restrict network access via cloud hyperscaler private link and peering. And you also have granular database auditing to keep track of what's happening on the database. So people say, well, how do I know my data is safe? Your data is always encrypted in transit and at rest, and optionally in use using client-side field-level encryption. I hope some of you caught Cynthia and Ken's talk earlier around queryable encryption. So making sure that anything that before it leaves the client is encrypted. And we'll talk about that a bit more later on. And also, obviously, with queryable encryption was something we released this year, which we're very excited about. Then there's also the ability to bring your own keys with AWS KMS or Azure Key Vault or also Google Cloud KMS. And plus the aforementioned security assurance, ISO 27001, SOC 2, and so on. All of those, and they're available in the deck once you get that in a week's time or so. So Atlas can take care of securing your data, whereby all of the complexity is removed and exposed via simple UI and API, allowing you to focus on your day job and reduce risk. So let me say that again, we take care of that complexity. It's going to be down to us to worry about that for you. You don't have to. So now I'd like to show you a brief demo. So first of all, here we are at the Atlas console, and it hasn't played. It's just great. I can't get my mouse to go on it. I'm going to get it. Yes. Okay, for some reason that didn't play. Right, okay, so the first thing I want to do is create a new cluster. I've got the choice of dedicated, I've got the choice of shared, which is free, and obviously I wouldn't recommend that for production. And we've also got serverless as well. And then on top of that, then we've got the choice of choosing which cloud we want to use. So in this case, I've gone for Google Cloud. And you can also decide which region you want to place that in. So I've gone for London in this case. You can also have multi-cloud, and you can have that full workload isolation. You can have things like electable nodes. You can have read-only nodes. So let's say I want to keep some certain data very close to people from a latency perspective. I can do that. And it could also, I might also have certain restrictions on things like data sovereignty as well. So I can use geo-based sharding to handle that. I'm going to have an analytics nodes, and then I can go ahead and choose my cluster tier there. So I've gone for an M30, which is the minimum we'd recommend for production. And then I can go ahead and give that cluster a name. So as we're here in London, I'm going to call it Mongo London. There we go. And go ahead and create that cluster. Great. Okay. Now, obviously that takes a few minutes. It's about 7 to 10 minutes. As they say in the video game adverts, sequences have been shortened. So if I go over to the next one, and we'll see here that effectively that's now been created. So what I can do now is go ahead and say, well, I can start looking at the objects within there. Well, right now I've got nothing in there because it's a brand new cluster. So, but anything I do put in there will automatically be encrypted out of the box. It will also go over the network via TLS as well. So anything I put in there is completely secure. We also do encrypted backups as well. So if I go ahead and create some objects within there, so let's go in here and put mortgage in there. Let's call it a mortgage database. I'm going to then call it loans, and I'm going to go ahead and create that. So essentially that is automatically now encrypted at rest. As I said, anything over TLS as well will be encrypted, so any network traffic. So if I start to insert some data in there, let's call it, as it's mortgages, let's call it loan type, and let's call it a repayment mortgage. And then effectively again, that is automatically encrypted at rest and in transit as I build it in now. Okay. So having now done that, the next thing I'd like to do is take a look at, from how we actually get access to the database. So I can start to look at adding a new user to access that database. So I've got the ability to use passwords. I've got the ability to use X509 certificates. And I've also got the ability to use AWS IAM as well. So identity and access management in there, that's built in as well. So I've got multiple options there to go in and make sure that's all secure. And it means that you can do things like when you're federating in, you can actually use federation as well. So you can have your single sign-on connected to this. So you can connect in with your single sign-on as well. So whatever you currently use for that, it's all easy for you to integrate with that as well to make sure that you're straight in there. So if we now take a look at network access, I've got multiple options within there as well. So I've obviously got the ability to use sort of our IP whitelisting, which obviously is something you're probably doing maybe in development, but not once you get into more production ready. Then you've got the option of doing VPC peering. So because we build you a VPC out of the box, you automatically can then start to peer that. It's very well documented. Now, I've set this up myself for demos as well. So you can go in there, you can choose which cloud provider you want to use, and go ahead and put in those credentials, and there's links in there for the documentation as well. So it'll take you straight to that documentation. And then finally, you've got the option of those private endpoints. So the private endpoints, again, you can add those in. Again, you've got the option of the three made clouds there. And again, you just go through and it'll walk you through each of those stages as you go. So lots of documentation in there, easily take you through to it and set it up. So very, very seamless to do. So the nice thing is you're getting this out of the box on top of what you've already got. We're giving you the ability to then build other things on top of it and layer up that security further and further. So if we now look at the advanced section, we've got some other pieces under there. So obviously we've got our kind of classic LDAP authentication there. We've got LDAP authorization as well for that role-based access control. And then on top of that, we've got the encryption at rest, bringing your own keys. So you can start to bring your own keys in there so that you're not relying on keys that the cloud provider has provided. You've got database auditing to keep track of things in the database. And you've also got the certificates there. So if we want to go ahead and start to look at that, again, there's documentation here. It's all very well documented. You click on the links in here, it'll take you straight through to that documentation. So in this case, it's telling me, this is taking us through to our documentation, telling you what to do next in here. And then obviously after that, we go in and we've got the ability to look at enabling that encryption now. So we go ahead and do that. We've got a choice of AWS KMS, we've got Azure Key Vault, and also Google Cloud KMS. And again, once I set that up, it allows me to bring my own keys in there, choose which cloud key provider I want to use. We can also integrate with other KMIP servers as well. And then once we click on that documentation link, it takes us straight to Google because I chose GCP at that time. So it takes me straight to the Google documentation there to again help you fill all that out. And I've set this up myself from scratch. It takes about 20 minutes. It's very, very straightforward to do. And then one final thing I didn't show you earlier. So if I just go back in now and take a look at the database cluster we built. and I edit that configuration, you'll see there's these additional settings which I didn't show earlier. So I'll scroll down, there's quite a lot of settings in there. But the main one we're interested in, obviously, is that bringing our own keys. So I can go ahead there and enable that, and then I've got the choice of that Google KMS that I just set up. Obviously, I can set up other ones in there as well if I want to use them for different projects. So that's very easy to do. But on top of that, we've also got our client-side field level encryption, which makes sure that you encrypt the data before it even leaves the client. And that means that even if you're cloning a development database for people to look at, to develop on, you don't have to worry about that being in the clear. It's all in ciphertext. And then with queryable encryption, that obviously Ken and Cynthia spoke about earlier, it was in the keynote as well. Effectively, it means that you've got that ability to go ahead and query that data, even when it's encrypted, but still keep it as ciphertext for when people are viewing it, which very, very important. And we're quite excited because it's a real world first. Nobody thought that was possible, and it really is, and we're doing it, so it's quite cool. It's also open source as well, so we do welcome peer review for people to take a look at that code and tell us if there's anything that we can change, so that's all good. So that's what I wanted to show you about how much you get out of the box and how we allow you to layer out other things on top of that quite easily. So in summary, we give you an environment which is really secure, and when you have a look at all those certifications as well, you can see it's a fully trusted environment. So I've kind of shown you the challenges and the issues with security in the public cloud, what that can do, the damage it can do to an organization. And as I said earlier, imagine that was your organization and how you can then obviously go ahead and solve that with MongoDB Atlas. So I would really urge you to try it today for free. We have the link, the QR code here will take you to the free sign up. You can sign up for that. And we believe that's going to change everything for you. And so we'd really like to have you start on that today. And there we are. And I think we've got a few minutes for Q&A, and then we've got feedback coming.
Very
Any
good,
questions?
Steve. Thank you. We did it.
You did it.
Okay, so any questions for Steve? One there. Would you kindly pass that back?
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Oh,
What I
I put my
wanted to
headphones
ask,
on, didn't I? Sorry, schoolboy error. There we go. That's better.
yeah, thank you very much for that. What
Pleasure.
I wanted to ask was, when you were speaking about the peer review, I do believe that was peer reviewing MongoDB's code, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
I wanted to ask if somebody was developing an application using MongoDB in their pipeline, in their architecture, does MongoDB offer any support in ensuring that's secure, ensuring everything's compliant and there are no errors in what they've developed?
I mean, certainly we can do things with effectively professional services can help with that a lot because they're used to building that stuff out and peer reviewing that, checking it out. So we're more than happy to help you with that. And obviously you can have an initial chat with us in DevRel or in solution architecture, and we can go ahead and help you with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Just wondering, have you looked at implementing any kind of sort of behavioral monitoring that automatically would look for changes in the data that was perhaps standing out from normal? Something that typically is done very often in machine learning. Is that something that would be? It's something that I would think useful, but it's something that you considered.
Yeah, and I know obviously we have things like database triggers which can act on things that have changed. I'm not aware of any other additional stuff, but I know that product management are looking a lot at the encryption side and at the overall security postures. So it's something that would be well worth feeding back onto our feedback hub and make sure that we know about that and we can feed that back to product management as well.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. In terms of kind of responsibilities, how does responsibilities for securing the database divide amongst, I guess, the user or the organization, MongoDB, and the cloud provider?
Yeah, it's a good question actually. So what we do is we obviously make sure there's as much of that back-end infrastructure is done for you, so the VPC is built in and so on and so forth. It's up to you to obviously connect that to your existing application, VPC, for example. And obviously there's an element of, so there's always going to be some process involved where you've got to actually make sure you go through and ratify that you've set things up correctly. But we try to take away sort of the really fundamental bits. You've got to think about how do those different policies work by having very clear-cut, easy roles to use, so that out of the box you can say, I'm going to use that role or that role or that role, and it saves you thinking about that other stuff. So it's kind of, it's still a partnership, and we always like to partner with our customers. But obviously, as now to the earlier question as well, we're always happy to peer review that for you as well.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you very much, Steve. That was very enlightening. If you wouldn't mind giving Steve a quick hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Thanks, everyone.
in the spirit of, again, making sure that these events are what you want, if you wouldn't mind, please taking advantage of the QR code to give a bit of feedback. That would be greatly appreciated. What we're about to do now is ask you to join us for another reception in the expo behind us now. That will be going on for another hour or so. And also, you will find in your inbox a survey for the event as a whole today, which again we'd appreciate the feedback on. And if you then show that to the help desk after you've completed it, you'll get some special swag. Okay? But thank you very much for being with us today. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully you've got a lot out of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you.